now I'm very happy to introduce our presenters for this evening. Matt and Deanna are the former owners of Soul to Seed Farm in Washington State. They both grew up in Michigan and have recently relocated back to the Chelsea area after living in Washington for the past 24 years. They farmed on 5 acres of land and sold their produce at farmers markets and through a community-supported agriculture program, or a CSA. Since they have retired from farming, they continue to grow food in a small garden in their backyard. They have a wealth of knowledge on how to start a small garden for personal use, as well as how to grow food on a larger scale. Although they have retired from farming, Matt continues to work part-time at a title and escrow company, and Deanna is a nurse practitioner at Henry Ford Allegiance in Jackson. They are both passionate about growing their own food and enjoy the multiple benefits having a garden provides. So thank you so much, Matt and Deanna, for being here with us tonight. We're really excited to hear what you have to share with us. And I'll pass it over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and thank you to VegMich for inviting us for this talk. So let me just get started here with some of our objectives. So there's a lot to talk about with farming. As Olivia said, we grew on a pretty big scale, but we're hoping to break it down into some very simple steps that we can get everyone to at least start thinking about growing food, no matter where you live, even if you only live in an apartment. So we're going to just kind of go over some real basics at this talk, and hopefully if there's interest, we'll be able to expand on this in the future, since there is a lot to know about farming. So we're going to go through some of the physical and mental health benefits of gardening. We're going to discuss the environmental benefits of gardening. We're going to describe areas around your house that are good locations and sizes for your garden. We're going to talk about which vegetables you can grow, especially if you're just starting out, things that might be easier to grow, how to prepare your soil to grow a garden, and then determining when to harvest. So I'm going to start first, and I'm going to talk more about the physical and mental environmental benefits of gardening, and then Matt is going to kind of take over and talk more about actual starting the garden. So one of the things that we think about with gardening is, a second, I just need to change one thing here, is some of these physical and mental health benefits. Now, the CDC defines moderate exercise as just 2.5 hours per week. And so going out and doing gardening, even if it's small scale gardening, you're still using a lot of your muscles to bend, lift things, you're pulling on things, you're walking, you're getting out in the sunlight, and doing all these things for 30 minutes a day can have a benefit of weight loss too. You can burn almost 300 calories an hour. So, whoops. Sorry about that. So some of those things from being out in the garden, it can help increase your immune function from being out in the sunlight. It can increase your flexibility because you're bending down, you're picking things up. It can help increase your muscle strength because you're lifting heavy things. It can also aid in weight loss, and it can boost your vitamin D levels. So all these things are very important things that you can gain just from going out into your garden every day. There are other things that you can also get from gardening. One is happiness. There is actually a bacteria in soil that can activate the neurons in your brain. So they have done studies on this bacteria in soil that when you breathe it in, when you're out in your garden and the bacteria gets breathed in, it activates neurons in the brain that helps release serotonin. And this has actually been shown to be similar to taking antidepressants. So it's important, if you're out in the garden and you're breathing in the soil, you can actually get a benefit of happiness and feeling better just as taking a medication. It can also be helpful for stress relief, also improving quality of life. And there's been some studies on increasing concentration with gardening, especially in children. There's been studies that have shown that it reduces ADHD symptoms in children, and it helps improve their concentration. And there was one study with adults that showed gardening can reduce their dementia by 36%. And the last thing that's important when we think about gardening, even if you're doing it on a small scale, is community. There are a lot of areas where you can get pea patches and things like that, and you can work with other people. But even if you're doing it in your own backyard, this is a great opportunity to work with your neighbors and, build some bridges with neighbors maybe you haven't met before, and, just talking to them and seeing if they would also be interested in going in together and, buying seeds, buying plant starts, and working together to garden. Because the one thing you have to remember, once you start planting things through the summer, it's really hard to leave your garden. And it's nice if you have someone that you can work with, that if you have to go somewhere or if you're on vacation, that they can come and, water your plants or harvest or things like that. So it's a really good way to get involved with your community too. And then the other thing that is important with the health benefits, if you think about, this is information from the CDC, and we think about the obesity rates in children right now in the US. And this data is a little bit old. This is from 2017 to 18, but the rates of obesity between 2 and 5-year-olds, 6 and 11, and 12 and 19-year-olds, you can see that there's almost a third of kids between 12 and 19 and 6 and 11 are obese in the United States. And this number has only been accelerating through time. So now this is 2022, these numbers are getting even bigger. And so we found that children who participated in school-based gardening projects ate around 26% more fruits and vegetables. So this is an important thing. If you have children at home and you can get them involved in gardening, even a small scale gardening in your backyard, you can help increase fruits and vegetables in their diet, which is very important. And then switching a little bit to the environmental benefits of gardening, this is really just basic carbon dioxide, cleaning the air and ground by taking carbon dioxide. This is basic photosynthesis. So as plants get water and they're taking carbon dioxide with the sun, then, they're helping to clean the air. And also the roots are also absorbing chemicals and heavy metals. So oxygen is released as a byproduct. And then of course, glucose is stored in the plants, which is what you're eating. So this is just on a very basic level, one of the environmental benefits of gardening. If we look a little bit deeper into food security, the global population is projected to be over 9 billion people by 2050. And food production will need to increase by 70%, they're predicting, in order to meet the average daily calories for a diet. So by more people growing their own food, this really helps increase the availability of food. So less people are needing to get food elsewhere. It increases the accessibility, and it also increases the utilization. So even on a big global scale, if more people had small gardens, it would help increase availability of food for everybody. And then other things to think about for environmental benefits is reduced packaging. We all go to the grocery store and have to buy fruits and vegetables and other items, obviously, but especially with fruits and vegetables, a lot of things we buy, like cherry tomatoes, broccoli, these things all come in packaging. And these are things that we can grow in our own backyards. So we can reduce the packaging, which also will reduce fossil fuel inputs. The other thing that it does is it creates habitat. So, when you have any kind of things that you're growing in your backyard, these things need to get pollinated, and it creates places for, butterflies. You'll see more bees around, all these things that will, be attracted to the things that you have in your garden. The other thing is compost. There's about 30% of our landfills are filled with scraps of yard waste that pile up in our garbage dumps. And this emits methane, which is, of course, a harmful greenhouse gas, contributes to global warming. So by composting our food, this really helps to cut down on that on a smaller scale. And then the last thing is it helps to reduce chemical inputs. So when you're starting to grow food, there are sometimes things that you have to put on your plants as pest control. And we do use some kind of inputs, but on a much smaller scale, and you can actually control those a little bit better on which kind of inputs you want to use. So if more people are starting to grow their own foods in their backyards, then you're really reducing how much chemical inputs are going out into the soil overall. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we get into the actual starting of the garden is that we know that food accounts for about 10 to 30% of a household's carbon footprint. And this study was done from the University of Michigan. And we can see on here that one of the higher carbon footprint foods is really animal products. And it starts with beef. You can see it has a dramatic drop down to cheese, pork, poultry, eggs, milk, and then very small carbon footprint for foods like potatoes and carrots and legumes. So even by shifting to a vegetarian meal, just one day for a week would save the equivalent of driving, over 1,000 miles in a car. So these are small things that we can do. If we start growing our own food, even if it's only a little bit of a small garden, then we can just replace one meal a day to a vegetarian meal. We can really help start making impact on the environment. So I'm going to switch over to our next topic, which is really how can you start growing food on a small scale? Like I said, Matt and I grew on a pretty big scale, but we're growing now in a small garden. And there are some real small steps you can take to kind of get the start of this. Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, hi everyone. So one of the first things we're going to talk about may seem kind of obvious, it's sort of like real estate, and that's location, location, location. So there's some obvious things to consider if you're starting a garden or even a container pot or anything on a small scale, and that is where you have full sunlight, you have a water source, something that's convenient for you, and you can start as small as you want. So like I mentioned, it could be something in a bucket, or you could do a raised bed. It could be anything that you're comfortable with. But kind of the main thing to think about if you're just getting started is an area where you have full sun, and you can also have too much sun, so you have to keep that in mind. It's a rare occurrence, but if you have an area that's maybe up against a wall, an exterior wall, and you get a lot of sunlight on that wall, what can happen is you'll get a lot of radiant heat off of that, and you can actually have that become too hot around your plants. So you just have to think about things like that when you're looking for a location. If you don't have any other options, and that's where you have a spot, then that's just kind of what you're gonna have to go with. And there's things you can do to provide shade or things like that if that's your only spot. But ideally, you want to find some place where you have good sun and you have a water source close by, and something that's convenient for you to get to and easy for you to tend to.
And would you say, just to say for sun, would you say about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, or what do you think is where they need to have sun?
Yeah, so depending on what you're growing, some plants will take less, some more, but ideally you want as much sunlight as you can get. In a perfect world, you'd pick a spot where you have 100% sun all day long. Not many of us have that, but you basically want to get as much sunlight as possible. So if you have an area where you go out and you know that you have full sunlight from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., but then you have another spot where you have full sunlight from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., you'd obviously want to take the spot that you get more sunlight.
Okay.
And like Deanna was mentioning before, we're also kind of learning how to grow on a smaller scale as well, because we grew for farmers markets and CSA. So, we suggest that if you're looking to get into gardening, you do something on a small scale to start, which could be, like I mentioned before, something where you have a raised bed, even something that's like 4 feet by 4 feet. You can do containers where you do, clay pots, or the plastic pots you get, like 2-gallon pots, 3-gallon pots, 5-gallon pots, that kind of thing, where you can arrange pots in an area. You want to, people will use, sometimes you have old tires sitting around, they'll fill up the tires with soil. Basically anything you can use, that will help contain that soil where you can get nutrients and water into it. The idea is to make it convenient as possible for you. You want something that you can water by hand, take a hose out there. You're not having to worry about hauling water anywhere. One of the benefits too to having something in a pot or a raised bed is that you're going to probably have to deal with weeds a lot less, or at least they're going to be a lot more manageable. You will probably get some pests, but again, it's going to be to scale. So It's something where, you know, if you have some insect pests, you may be able to go out one day and just pick them off your plants. It can be that simple. So, you know, there's steps you can take that will help you, you know, prevent a lot of pest issues, and it's a lot easier, you know, on a small scale. So, the next thing we want to talk about is kind of which vegetables to start to grow, or things that are easy to grow. In general, I mean, most things want to grow. If you provide them with soil and food and water, they're going to do a good job of growing themselves. There's not a lot that you really need to do if you provide that environment. So we kind of picked 5 things that are, you know, you could say are the easiest, in the sense that there's not much you have to do with them. If you go away for a weekend, or you miss a couple days, you forget, whatever, you're busy, these things are the kind of things where you know, you plant them, and, you know, one day they're not there, and 2 days later you have 10 of them. So some of the things like tomatoes, especially in Michigan, love warm nights. They grow pretty good, pretty fast. You know, especially things like cherry tomatoes, they're great. You can just, you know, pick them, snack them. You know, grab a couple when you're walking by, out the door, whatever. They're easy to grow. Cucumbers are another thing that are pretty easy to grow. Lettuce is easy, doesn't require much, you know, maintenance or anything like that. Zucchini, everybody loves zucchini. Everybody likes to get that big giant zucchini so they can make zucchini bread. So those are, you know, one zucchini plant can feed an entire family for a summer. I mean, it's, you know, zucchini plants, especially in the middle of the summer, you'll get, you know, it's the kind of thing you go out in the morning and it's not ready to harvest, and, you know, by mid-afternoon you've got, you know, two harvestable zucchinis out there. So those are that's a good one. And then herbs, or also peas are easy to grow. You can plant those early, they don't require much. And then herbs, you can do things like basil, parsley, rosemary. Those are all nice things to have around, you know, that you can use throughout the season. So
And I will just mention too, when you're thinking about growing some things, especially like tomatoes, we're going to talk a little bit more later in the talk about seeding your own plants or buying plant starts. But when you're thinking about tomatoes, there are some tomatoes that take a little bit longer to grow. And like Matt mentioned, cherry tomatoes are a really great tomato to start with. They grow pretty easily, and they don't need a lot of maintenance, and you can get a lot of them. So it's something that every day you get a few cherry tomatoes every day. So those are really nice to start with if you're thinking about growing some tomatoes. And you will need with tomatoes, and if you were going to start something like peas, like Matt mentioned, you will need to have some kind of trellising for those, or some type of wire or something for them to climb up. And you can find any of those kinds of things at your local gardening store, or those kind of places. And there are videos that can show you how to do that a little bit better, so that you can get those things growing up a trellis or something like that.
Yeah, so some of the benefits, we're going to first talk about if you wanted to start your own seeds. Some of the benefits are that you have more varieties. So if you're looking for some specific heirloom variety or something along those lines, or something that's maybe out of the norm, you look at myriad seed catalogs, or even if you go into right now, a lot of the hardware stores, seed supply stores, even places like Menards, they're already have their seed stands out, and there's just all kinds of different varieties of seeds. So there's hundreds of different varieties of lettuce, tomatoes, all those kind of things. So if you're looking to get into that, that's one of the things about starting your own seed, is you have more variety. It's less expensive. So to buy a packet of tomato seeds, you get 20 to 25 tomato seeds. Depending on the seed you're buying, it can be anywhere from $2 to $5 for a pack, as opposed to if you're buying plant starts, which are going to be more expensive for that specific plant. There's also just the joy of that feeling of knowing that you packed that cell, you planted that seed yourself, you watered it, you watched it germinate, and then you watch it grow, and you watch it come to fruition. It's all very gratifying, and you get quite a bit of satisfaction from that as well. So it's just that having that process of knowing that you took this little seed. You'd be amazed at things like brassicas, like broccoli, cauliflower. I mean, you hold it's just absolutely tiny little seed. It's amazing that thing can produce a giant head of broccoli. So that kind of thing is kind of some of the benefits of if you want to start your own seed.
And then things to think about starting your own seeds. They do take more time. I will say in Michigan, it's pretty warm here, so you don't necessarily have to start seeds very early here. Some people will start their seeds indoors, and we didn't really talk about that too much here because that's a little bit more complex, but you really would be safe starting seeds here in May, like, right, what you say, Matt, May 1st or something like that.
Or middle of April, May, yeah, for sure.
So you could like start then, and you'd be able to leave them outside without having to bring them inside. And I'm starting with heat mats and these other types of things. Starting your own seeds does require a little bit more space. And there's a little bit more material because you have to buy, the trays, you have to buy the soil. So you do need some more material when you're first starting your seeds. But I will say once you buy those things, just like the startup costs are higher, but once you have all those things, most of it you can reuse. So if you are thinking about in the future starting with your own seeds, it is a good option. But if you're just starting out the first time, plant starts may be the way to go.
Right. So with using plant starts, some of the nice things, the benefits are that obviously, most of them are either ready to go into the garden by the time you're purchasing that seedling, or they're very close to being ready to go in the garden. So they've got enough of a head start that maybe you just keep them outside in a sunny area for a week and water them until you're ready to plant them. And there's no you don't have that effort of going through setting up your soil and your containers and seeding them and all that, so it takes a little bit less time. There's obviously a little bit less maintenance with that too. You're basically just watering at that point until you transplant them into the ground. You're also, one of the nice things about it too is that you're supporting local farmers or your local businesses. So you've got most of the farmers markets around here. I know we have access to the Chelsea Farmers Market, and almost all the farmers that are there are growing starts, plant starts. There's farm shops around, even big box stores. I mean, I'm sure everyone's aware when you start, shopping around, especially April or May, you start to see all these, these plants out there that, you can purchase. And you may have, there may be less varieties, but especially if you go to a farmer's market and you're buying from a farmer, they're going to have varieties probably that they grow, or varieties that they know either, their customers like, or that are easier to grow, or they know will do well in this environment. So that's an obvious plus. And then, obviously you can start things later. So like Deanna was saying, I mean, when we were farming, different climate in Washington State, but I know here it's the same where, some farms are, planting in greenhouses all year long, or now they're already starting to think about planting things like onions and seeding those things. So you can definitely start earlier, but we're just suggesting that, if you have no experience, it may be more beneficial to wait till the soil warms up, the weather starts to warm up, and you'll notice that your plants are going to respond, a lot better. So.
And that's a really good point that Matt made about going to a local farmer's market if you have something near you in your area, because they just know so much about what the starts are. You can get these at some, big box stores, but if you go to a farmer's market, they're going to give you plant starts of usually plants that they're already growing. So they do work. And then you can, kind of build a community and get to know these farmers. And of course, you're not going to be growing everything, so you still want to maybe shop there and support them, but at least they can give you a lot of information on their starts and, maybe when to plant them. And if you have any problems with them, they'll be there to, kind of help you and walk you through it.
So if you are going to, you do want to jump into starting your own seed, some of the things that you'll need to start, the materials are, you're going to need a germination mix or some type of soil mix, some type of potting mix. Preferably, I mean, you can use potting mixes for starting seeds. Ideally, you want to use a germination mix, but that's not, that's not completely necessary. You'll need some type of bin, obviously, things I mentioned before, like, I mean, anything you can imagine that you can put some soil into and have, maybe something that doesn't have drainage, you'd have to drill a hole in it, like a bucket, any of those type of thing. There's, like any type of pot, any size pot. I mean, there's just a myriad of different things you can use out there to plant in. You can use, when you're starting your seed, the seed trays. You can use, we just went to an Ace Hardware, got some compostable seed trays, which you'll see. We're going to show a little video of us packing some seed trays. So those are the type of thing where you can just seed and then plant it right in the ground if you want, and they'll completely break down in there. You don't have to worry about it. Things like Dixie cups, paper cups, you can use those, and you can go as far as you want with that to actual the plastic cells where you'd have to pop the plants out. But I would say if you're starting, you want to use something basic that you don't have to worry about too much. Something that is either compostable or you can just take and put right into the ground. Obviously you can use tags, so you can, I think most of the hardware stores have those as well, just the little white plant tags. So you can write, what varieties you have, what you're planting, all that kind of thing. So that later in the year, when your container garden or whatever it is overgrown, and now you don't know what these 10 varieties of tomatoes are that you grew, at least you'll have your little tag in there. And then obviously water. That's going to be huge. And depending on the year, last summer was an amazing summer for water. We hardly had to even water our garden. So, but that is something you're going to want to have access to. So those are kind of just the basics to get you started.
So we're going to just show a little video. I think it's about 6 minutes long. And this is just for people, if you've never started seeds before, we're going to go through how to pack some little cells of soil, put the seeds in, and what you have to do to keep them like that until you transplant them into your garden.
Okay, so what we're doing right now is we're gonna do a little bit of seeding. And what I've got here is I've got some organic potting soil mix, and you can use either a potting soil mix or a seed starting or a germination mix. The main thing is you want to make sure this number on here you see is a low number like this. So 0.09.
Deanna, we lost the sound. You need to.
And so for seedlings, you don't need very much to get them going. So these will help to keep them from burning or getting too much nutrients when they're young. So what we're going to do is you need some kind of container to mix your seedling or potting soil mix in, and then just some water, either a hose or a bucket or whatever you have handy. And so we'll start with that. And you're going to kind of look at how many seedlings you're going to be planting that day or how many pots you're going to be filling, and just kind of guesstimate how much mix you need. And anything that's left over, you can just leave in your container and just put it in a shaded area, and it will last till the next time you use it. So we're going to put a little bit of water in here. We're going to mix this up so that it's wet and it starts to cling together. You want it so that when you pick it up, you can maybe wring just a little bit of water out of it, but not anything that's like a faucet. So that's a little too wet. So we're gonna add a little more mix. Going to thoroughly mix it so that all the soil is moist. And it should kind of stay together when you hold it. So something like that. So when I squeeze it, there's still a little bit of water coming out of there, but okay, now we have these compostable potting containers, which you can get from your local hardware store or gardening supply store. And we've also got these small Dixie cups. So both of these are really nice for seed starting. So you grab your container. You're going to just pack your soil in there, and you're going to press firm, but you don't want it to be packed so tightly that it's too tight. So you want it so that it's firm, but not so tight that you can't, water's gonna beat up out of it and not actually soak into it. So there's our soil mix in those, and we'll do a Dixie cup, same thing. So it's maybe like, I'd say lightly packed, so maybe like a medium pack, if that makes sense. Okay. For the Dixie cup, you can use, I'm just using a drill bit. You just poke a small hole in the bottom, just something for drainage. And we're gonna make our little dibbles for our seeds. You can use a pen, you can use your pinky, anything that works for you. We're using a Sharpie. We're just gonna make a little dibble, about a 1/2 inch. If you're planting bigger seeds like squash or pumpkins, those kind of things, you can make a little bit bigger dibble. For something small, like brassicas, like broccoli, that kind of stuff, lettuce, you can make it a little bit smaller, but just in general, about the circumference of a Sharpie pen and maybe a 1/2 inch into the soil. So next we're gonna take, we've got some chard here. So normally we would just put 1 seed in each cell, but if you have a small amount that you're doing, so like in this case we're doing 4, it's okay to do 2 seeds in each cell. That way, if one doesn't germinate, you make sure that you have all your cells that will germinate, and you can thin them out later. So we're gonna go 2 seeds in each hole. Just drop them in there. And then on the Dixie cup, let's do a summer squash or a zucchini. These are a bigger seed. And it doesn't matter with these kind of seeds how you put them in there. They're going to grow no matter what. So it doesn't matter if you put them in sideways, pointed up, pointed down. So I'm just going to put it in there, just kind of lightly press it in there. So you can see it's about a 1/2 inch below the top of the soil line. And I'm just going to gently fill it over there and kind of give it a light pack. And we're gonna do the same thing with these. I'm just gonna gently push the soil over and around the hole or the dibble and give it a light pack. And then if you want, you can get little markers from the little tags from any home, supply store or any hardware store, anything like that, farmer supply store. You can write down what you have planted and you're gonna stick it in there. And that's all you have to do to seed your plants.
Okay. So that's a pretty basic, basic idea of how to seed things. Once you do that, if you start your seeds in end of April or, first part of May, you really don't have to do much. You can just keep them outside on a table. You just have to, keep the soil moist. So you want to keep them watered, and then you'll start to see, your little plants start coming up. And then you have to, at some point, take those little plants and put them into your bigger container or into your raised bed or into your garden or wherever that is. So you want to talk about the containers?
Yeah, so if you're whatever type of container you're using, we just talk about a little bit of the materials you're going to need. And again, there's myriad of things out there. We're just mentioning a few just because they're usually the most accessible or easiest to get. And the first thing is obviously with the soil mix, something like Miracle Grow or Black Gold. I know Ace Hardware and a lot of the hardware stores will have some type of mix. But what you want is something, you want some type of vegetable garden mix, or you want a raised bed soil mix, something along those lines. And there'll be, all types of different types of soil when you go to look at a garden center, especially, but they're all really clearly marked. So they'll say certain ones are specific for vegetables, so they'll have a higher nitrogen count. And some are designed more for flowers, because when something flowers, it needs more phosphorus, so they'll be higher in phosphorus. But you just want to basically, whatever it is you're looking to do, if you say, I want to grow some mixed vegetables, just look for some type of soil mix that's a garden mix or a mixed vegetable mix. And then you'll want some type of compost. Black Gold, again, they make an organic garden compost. And again, there's all types of different companies out there that will make something that will be either called organic garden compost mix or plant compost mix, something along those lines. If you happen to get one that was, for shrubs by mistake, it's probably okay, but it's just the specifics with vegetables, especially fruits and vegetables, is kind of the basic things to remember is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are kind of the main things that they need to get going. And most of these soil mixes and composts will tell you what they have in them. So that's what you want. And then same thing with a fertilizer. There's all types of different things. You can get vegetable food fertilizers. There's vegan fertilizers if that's something you're interested in. There's all types of composted fertilizers, from chicken manure to turkey manure, whatever it is, steer manure, where it actually is already composted for you, and you would just add that to your mix. And anything you get from the soil mix, the compost, or the fertilizer, they'll all have directions on them for how much you should be applying based off of the size of your container. So most of them, unless you just go nuts with fertilizer, it's hard to, they're usually designed so that it's really hard to what they call burn them or over fertilize them. But you definitely want to follow the instructions on whatever package you get.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how much soil you actually need, and you have to do a little bit of math for that. So whatever container we're going to use, or if you're going to start with raised beds, or if you happen to have like some kind of raised bed in your backyard already, or an area you want to use, you basically have to figure out the cubic feet, because that's how soil comes. When you buy bags of soil, it's always in cubic feet. So you just have to multiply the width times the length times the height of your container. You can also find a cubic feet calculator on the internet and just plug your numbers in and it'll do the math for you. But once you have that number, that's really going to help you to know how much soil you're going to need. And you basically are going to do 4 parts of soil to 1 part of compost. And then whatever the fertilizer says on the instructions on the bag, you'll add that much fertilizer. But the basic components of your soil that's going to go into your container is going to be 4 parts of the soil to 1 part of compost. So you do have to kind of figure out how big your container is to know what that number is going to be.
Yeah, and that's just, these are just general numbers, kind of the basics to get you started. Obviously, there's leeway and there's differences in that, but that'll get you started. Yeah, so if you have started seedlings yourself, in general, I mean, anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, for things like lettuce, green onions, things like that. Tomatoes, if you're just getting started, tomatoes will take the longest and are going to require the most amount of attention if you are going to start them by seed, because those do anything that's, think of anything that's in the nightshade family. So peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, those are going to require a lot of warmth and light at the very beginning. So those are kind of more of a daunting thing to take on if you're going to start seeding. Other things, like I said, like with zucchini, cucumbers, those things, you have a little bit more play with those. But in general, you want to wait till your seedlings get what are called true leaves on them, which are basically once you can identify that plant, the first time you can identify it. When they're first growing, a lot of the brassicas, the things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, they kind of all look the same when they're just emerging from the soil. So you basically, a general rule of thumb is on things like that, 2, 3, 4 inches high. Obviously you can let them get bigger. You want them to be, like I said, you want them to be identifiable so that you can see the true leaves on them and you can identify what that plant is before you transplant them. And they can always grow bigger. I mean, it's just basically the thing you just have to watch out for is you just don't want them to become root bound, where they're growing so rapidly that the roots will all, start to wrap internally around the soil. And that's something that just comes with experience. So maybe you'll plant, maybe if you start seeding, you'll look at in 2 to 3 weeks and you'll try and pull that plant out. And if that plant's not easily coming out with the soil, you kind of know that it's probably not ready. If you're, pulling it out and the soil comes out with it and it's wholly held together, then you're safe to plant it out. But again, that's just something with experience. So
Yeah, I kind of put this picture on here because it actually does show a really good size of a plant that you can transplant. You can see how all the roots are on this little piece of soil. You pulled it out of the tray and it all stayed together. If a plant is really small and you go to pull it out of the soil, all the soil just crumbles and you don't really see any roots. So you can kind of play with it too. If you feel like your plant's getting big enough, kind of pull it out and see if it's ready to go or not.
yep. And then obviously to plant it, then just that little picture there is a good visual too, to just dig a small hole. You want to basically, doesn't have to be anything massive. You just want to basically get your that part of your soil block or your whatever you're pulling it out of, or if you're just planting directly from those compostable ones too that we showed you, you can just break those off and you have an individual little pot there already that you started in, that you can just plant straight into the ground, and that will actually degrade right there, and the roots will actually push through. But otherwise, just want to make a hole that's big enough to get the soil block or the soil in there, and then you're going to add a small handful of fertilizer based on the recommendation of the package you're using. You can also just spread it over an area ahead of time and work it in. So if you've got a 2 foot by 2 foot section you're planting some plants in, and the package of fertilizer says you need to use this much in that amount of space, then you can always just mix that right in and plant your plant right into that. Things that grow quickly, especially like lettuce, you don't, once you fertilize it once, it's usually fine. Things like tomatoes that are growing, throughout the season and are producing tomatoes, 4, 5, 6 times during the growing season, you may have to add, side dress to those, but we won't get too much into that right now. And that's pretty much it. And then you're just going to make sure you keep them watered. And again, it's all going to depend on the rain situation. Obviously, the more it rains, the less you're going to have to water, but you want to make sure that, your soil is never, you don't have to keep it saturated, but you want to keep it moist. You want to make sure that, they're getting enough water. Maybe during the summer, you're watering things every other day. You get a good rain, maybe you don't water it for a week, but you definitely don't want it to get dried out. That's kind of the worst thing, is to have it just get completely dried out. So you just kind of have to monitor that.
And this is a good time, for you to make friends with your neighbors.
Right.
If you ever want to leave anywhere in the summer, if you have a garden. All right. And then just determining when to harvest. We just wanted to put a quick slide up here. There are some things that we consider as single harvest crops and other things that are recurring crops. So just so if you plant lettuce, once you harvest that lettuce, it's not going to come back. You're taking it and you need to plant more lettuce if you want more lettuce. And this is when you can get in even more into succession planning and like starting seeds throughout the year. And these are all more advanced topics, but broccoli, cauliflower, once you harvest it, there's no more harvest. Things like your zucchinis, summer squash, cucumbers, tomatoes, herbs, those are going to keep coming back. So as you harvest them, you'll go out there, a few days later, a week later, and you'll be able to get more food from them. So there is a difference in some of those things. So keep that in mind when you're buying plant starts or starting your own seeds, that some things you'll need to plant many of if you want more of.
And just real quick with lettuce though, that is one thing where you can do, you'll see like seed mixes. So you can get a mix of lettuce where you have 10 different varieties of lettuce in one pack. And that's the kind of thing where you can actually, before it becomes a full head, you can make a little row of it and it'll get to 4 or 5 inches tall. You can actually harvest it as a mixed green salad. And then those will grow a couple of generations before it gets to the point where you'll notice that, each line you're cutting, it starts to get brown on there. But if you're growing a head of lettuce, typically that's just a one cut thing.
And then finally, just in conclusion, so there's a lot of physical and mental benefits from gardening. Having a garden can be helpful to the environment, but the most important thing is just, if you have not had a garden before, ever grown food before, just start small and have fun with it, because once you really enjoy it, you're going to find yourself wanting to dig up your entire yard and planting food for your whole neighborhood. I guarantee it.
All right. So the first question is, someone said they have a cement patio and they're wondering if they do a square raised bed, should it be set off the cement or should they put wood on the bottom, or how do you recommend they go about doing a square raised bed on a cement patio?
Well, if you make it deep enough,
you're going to building it out of wood. You're going to build something out of wood. I guess what I would say, if you have a cement patio and you want to build up like with wood, make a box, you can do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything off the cement though, because a lot of times you're going to put like rock down or something anyway. You just need to have it lifted up and you need to have some kind of drainage under it. So if you're going to build it out of wood, the bottom needs to be a little bit open so that water can drain out, but it can drain out on your patio as long as there's space underneath for water to drain, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Awesome. Yeah, they didn't clarify exactly what they were going to build it out of, but yeah, just the drainage tip I think would be super
Yeah,
helpful.
and just real quick to add to that too, is if it's deep enough, if you make a box that's 16 inches deep or 2 feet, 24 inches, it's not gonna, unless you just are oversaturating it. It's typically the water's not going to drain that far
Yeah.
through anyway. I mean, unless you get a heavy rain, but like Deanna said, you probably want to have something that's at least off the ground to allow for drainage.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Another question is, do you have any suggestions on companion planting? Like what types of plants grow well together, or if someone just has like one small bed, if they can grow a couple different things in there?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about companion planting on a small scale like that because things are going to be so close together anyway. It's not going to make as much of a difference. Certainly, if you have things more spread out, there are things that are beneficial. One plant may deter another plant's pest, that kind of thing. And you can, there's tons of information out there to get you started on that kind of thing. One of them is John Jevons has a really good book. It's like it's had, I think, 20 different editions by now, but it's like how to grow more vegetables than you ever thought were possible or something like that. But there are books that go into that if that's something you're interested in for sure.
Okay, very nice. Okay, someone said, what is the best way to grow pumpkins? They find that the stem often dries out. I guess they're wondering about watering tips. It seems, I don't know if you guys have experience particularly with pumpkins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they do pretty good. I mean, that's the cucurbit family, which is squash and cucumbers and that kind of thing. Melons are in that family, and they are susceptible to diseases. So that could be a situation where, I mean, without looking at the plant or knowing, there's all different types of things that can cause those kind of things. In general, I mean, the biggest issues we usually would see with home when we were farming and people would come to the market and say they're having problems, it was usually like pollination issues. So you want to make sure that you have a source for pollinators in the area. And typically there's, no matter where you live, there's going to be, whether it's butterflies or moths or bees, there's going to be some type of pollinator in the area. But the more you can do to kind of bring them into that area, the better. Otherwise, it's, there's too much to get into disease issues or things that could cause problems with pumpkins. But for the most part, once they're started, if they are seedlings and you plant them, you can overwater them. They will, they can rot in the soil in a sense, depending on how warm the soil is. But it sounds like what they were describing was an issue with the actual fruit, which could be, several different things. But for the most part, if they're, once they get going, and once they start setting fruit, they're usually okay.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, this person just asked which types of lettuces. I think they're referring to the first slide where you just showed a couple of the different things people could grow. So I don't know if you have any notes on easier types of lettuces or what your favorites are. That was a great tip you already gave with kind of like the mixed lettuce greens. But anything more to say on that?
I would say like any kind of leaf lettuce. The leaf lettuce grow really well, and so do like butter type lettuces. Romaine can grow pretty good, but it takes a little bit longer, to grow. But any kind of green leaf lettuce, you should have really no problem with. That stuff grows very easy.
And you can look, depending on lettuce will sometimes it doesn't like extreme heat, so it will, it will tend to bolt in the summer where it'll actually just want to go to seed. So one thing to think about with lettuce is if you have an area where you can either, get shade on it or for part of the day, if it's like in the middle of the summer, that will help it. So most seed packages, I think they still do this, or just almost any seed packet you pick up now will have at least some general, instructions on it about how much sunlight or that kind of thing. So, but those are things you can find online pretty easily.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Someone asked, when is the best time to transport the plants from inside the house? I think like time of year, especially maybe focused in Michigan,
Mhm.
can we recommend?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely you don't want to put anything out before the last kind of traditional frost date. I mean, obviously, there's no nature doesn't have any rules in terms of like, this is the date that we usually see our last frost, so that's the last time I'm gonna cause a freeze. But in general, you can look at your zone, and where we are. I think it's, are we zone 5 or something?
I think so.
I think we're zone 5, 4 or 5, something like that. But you can look, and there's a USDA has really good maps of like, kind of what to expect for temperatures and when to expect them, and just your own, just from being outside and living in a state, you kind of will get an idea of when things can happen. And so typically you want to make sure that, if you can push things out, later, it's better. So that's why we were saying kind of, generally speaking, by May 1st, you should be okay to start putting things out in the garden, where unless there's, just some freak cold weather moves through, which is possible.
And there is something we didn't talk about if you're starting your own seeds, that there is this thing called hardening off of your plants. So if you're going to start all your seeds inside, you can't just bring them outside and then plant them. You have to get them used to being outside, which is called hardening off. So you bring them outside and then you have to bring them back in, and it's, bring them outside for a few hours, then a couple of days. You kind of go back and forth until the plant gets used to the temperature before you actually put them in the ground. So we didn't really have time to talk about those things, but you'll have to look into that more online about hardening off if you are starting your own seeds.
Okay, yeah, that's a great tip. All right. Let me see. Someone asked, how often do you change out your above ground soil? Like, I guess from year to year, or do you have to, add anything to the soil in a planter, do anything different to it before you like plant your next crops?
Yeah, I think it's good to, I mean, I think, well, I don't know if you want to get into soil testing or anything like that, but you can get even like basic soil testing kits to kind of see what's going on. But for the most part, yeah, you want to, especially in a container, especially like if it's a small container or a pot, you want to replace that every year. So, those nutrients are being used by the plant, and it's not like you're, on a farm where you have, so many organisms and worms and things moving through there, where you're constantly rebuilding the soil. At a container garden, you want to get, and it depends on the size of it too, but definitely on things that are smaller, you want to replace that stuff every year. If you have a raised bed, what you want to do is just probably, work in new compost and new fertilizer each season, that kind of thing. Or at the end of the growing season, you can take a pitchfork or a shovel or something and kind of turn the soil and kind of mix it around, and then you can add some of your compost then, so that it sits there over the winter. You can do cover crop on a small scale, where you just throw down some clover seed or some rye or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's definitely things you can do, but for the most part, you want to make sure that you're always adding to that soil mix the next season.
Yeah, and if you do have like a small garden space or raised bed at home, you can put like leaves on top. You can turn over your plants from the year before and just let it compost for that whole winter. Some people even cover their garden with, like plastic or like something to keep it warm. And then in the spring, when you take that off, you can just work all that stuff into your soil, and like gives you a whole nother layer of, to build your soil up.
Okay, very nice. Okay, someone said, why not plant the seeds directly into the ground?
So that's great. Good question. You can do that for sure. So once in general, we recommend either buying seedlings or starting them from seed, just because the kind of the bigger and more established that plant is, when you put it into the ground, the better chance it's going to have of survival. It's going to already, be better at pest control, like, dealing with pests and that kind of thing. If you can, once the soil warms up, ideally, if you can start your seeds in the soil and they can germinate and grow right there, and you don't have to transplant or anything, that would be the most ideal. So maybe that's something you consider doing as, maybe later plantings, or like I said, once the soil is completely warmed up. You just have to, the thing you have to worry about then is, when a seedling emerges out in your raised bed or whatever it is, it's just very susceptible. So that means that night, something can come by and just clip that thing off, and you're done. So you just kind of have to pay more attention to it. Maybe, put something over it at night to protect it. But in general, yeah, if you can ideally put a seed in the ground and let it germinate and grow from that location, it's going to do pretty well.
And just to really quick, we didn't really talk about this, but there are two things. Well, there's more, but carrots and beans really shouldn't be transplanted. So you really can't transplant carrots. But beans don't do well transplanted. You can do it, but we've struggled with transplanting beans before. So those are two things that I would recommend always direct seeding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Very nice. Let me see. I guess kind of back to when we were talking about companion planting, someone asked if there are any specific plants that should not be planted together. I'm sure this is a complicated answer as well, but.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much on a small scale. There definitely are things that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that, I can tell you, we grew for 15 years, and 13 at our own place and 2 in another. And we tried all different types of companion planting and other things. And ideally what we found was if you can get a healthy plant into the ground and you have a good ecosystem around it, so you have some, like we said, maybe look at some beneficial insect mixes, things to bring in
Flowers.
Yeah, flowers to bring in other insects. Especially with insect pressure, you're going to get insects that are going to, essentially hunt those insects that are the problems with your plants. And aside from disease issues, I just wouldn't worry too much on a small scale about companion planting, other than, like I said, just trying to create the best environment you can for that plant, because once they start thriving, they're going to do pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then another person asked, do you recommend planting food like veggies and flowers in the same garden?
Yes.
So you're saying yes?
Yeah, if you can plant flowers, you can plant them like either in between rows, or you can plant them around your garden or anything, but having flowers in your garden will be very beneficial.
Okay, very nice. Sorry, I'm just reading through some of the more questions. Let me see. Okay, someone's saying, despite having 2 dogs, we have a lot of rabbits, chipmunks, squirrels. What humane deterrents do you recommend for these critters?
A fence.
Yeah, if you're doing something small, even like a raised bed, you can get like chicken wire and like just even PVC pipe, and just bend that PVC pipe over your bed or whatever it is, just something to keep those pests from in there. The garden that we put in last year, we have obviously deer out there and things like that. So, we did a full fence for deer, and then we put a metal fence around it to deter things
like bunnies,
like rabbits and all that kind of thing. But yeah, that's going to be your main pest. A lot of people worry about insects, which can be a problem, but honestly, if you especially have a small garden, a rabbit can come in one night and wipe it all out. So you want to make sure you have something, whether that's fencing or and they make specifically like actual rabbit fencing, which is I think maybe 2 feet high, and it's something that they can't get through. But an easy fix for a container, that kind of thing, would just be like chicken wire you put over it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, someone asked if there are any seed libraries nearby. I don't know if you guys.
I'm not sure about here. I know they're around. I wouldn't doubt it.
I would also, there's a really good resource that Michigan State has, a really good resources for planting and agriculture. You can get on their extension, Michigan State Extension. They have a lot of resources about this area, especially like, the last frost days, and they have a lot of good resources if people are interested. I would look there.
Okay. Very nice. Yeah, that kind of ties into the next question. Someone was just asking in general your favorite resources for, people wanting to learn more information about that. That was a great one. I don't know if you have any others you recommend people check out.
Yeah, if you're into, like I'd mentioned John Jevons, Elliot Coleman is another person that is really popular, that has a tons of information out on small scale farming specifically. And then beyond that, any like, I mean, like Deanna mentioned, Michigan State,
Master Garden.
yeah, or like master gardener programs are
Yeah.
really good. So if you can find, most areas have some type of master gardener program, and they're very helpful because they can help you with specific issues on specific plants. So those things, but most extensions, university extensions will have something. I mean, Michigan State's actually a really good well-known agricultural school. So you can actually find quite a bit off of them, but also your farmers markets. I mean, you can talk to farmers that are growing that food in your area, and they can help you out with a lot of things as well.
Mhm.
All right, very nice. Yeah, a lot to check out. Let me see. Oh, someone asked if, she says, is there a flower that keeps bugs or animals away? And someone also asked suggestions on keeping grasshoppers away.
I don't know about grasshoppers. How about marigolds?
Yeah, I mean, we've
I
heard, again, most of the stuff that
Yeah.
I've seen is anecdotal. I mean, there's all these people will tell you, if you plant a marigold or this around your garden. I mean, honestly, a deer isn't, I mean, they'll eat just about anything. And unless, I know some people have had, there are sprays, like it's, things that are supposed to mimic odors and aromas that those animals don't like. And, I don't know how well they work. I mean, it seems like maybe the kind of thing you'd have to reapply quite a bit. I mean, honestly, the easiest thing to do is just find some type of, like I said, some type of fencing or chicken wire, something to just, eliminate, things like deer, the squirrels, that kind of thing. And then there's row cover, which is you can get a good resource is Johnny's, JOHNNYS, and they're out of Maine, and they have all kinds of, from seeds to tools to supplies for anything from small scale to large scale farming. And one of the things they sell is row cover, which is very popular, and it's just a thin fabric type cover that allows light and moisture in, but it will keep pests out. And that's something you can buy a small amount of. And again, like Deanna was saying, it's a good opportunity to, if you have several people that want to get started at once, you can buy things in bulk so that you can all utilize those type things. But it's real easy to make, to use that row cover, or remay it's called, and keep your pests out and allow sunlight and moisture in.
Okay. Someone does say that they tried having a fence and they tried row covers, and both were decimated by woodchucks.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you
Sorry,
need
Frankie,
you need a bigger
sorry.
fence.
Yeah, bigger
Bigger
fence.
fence. Keep going bigger until they don't get in.
Okay, let me see. I think we have time, just one more question. We've basically gotten through them all. Someone did say they have a greenhouse, and they asked if you recommend removing plastic during the summer. So I'm not entirely sure what
Like
they
growing
mean.
in the greenhouse?
I think so. Diva, can you clarify on that?
Well, either way, I mean, here it probably gets, yes, too hot where you'd either, I mean, if it's small enough you can remove it, I would say, yes. If not, you can also get shade cloth, which is another thing that I'm sure you can find it at some local places here, but also Johnny's is another place where you can get that. And it's just, literally like a black fabric that will help cut down on the amount of sunlight that gets through. Obviously, if you have a small enough greenhouse where it's not an
20 feet
issue.
long. I mean, you can roll the sides up
Yeah.
usually on greenhouses, and open the end walls and things like that will help. But if it's really hot, I mean, this is our first year in Michigan. So I will say we didn't have to use it. We had a lot of greenhouses where we didn't use anything in a greenhouse and we grew everything fine. I think it gets really hot here. So you would have to mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah.
For sure.